In this episode of the Data Exchange, I speak with Lauren Kunze, CEO of Pandorabots, a widely used platform for building chatbots. Lauren Kunze, CEO of Pandorabots, welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's start off by having you describe what is Pandorabots.
So, Pandorabots is a chatbot development and hosting platform that grew out of a large open source hobby project over the course of a decade. Today, we have about 250,000 registered developers who have signed up for the platform and built over 350,000 chatbots for a variety of applications. And we also work with global brands and Fortune 500s to help them build bots as well. Collectively, all the bots hosted on our platform have processed over 80 billion conversations between bots and humans today, which, Ben, of course, is how I know you, because we met when I was giving a talk about all the strange things that people say to chatbots based on all of that data.
And so make the case for bots today. So why should a company consider bots?
Well, it's interesting because we and the industry as a whole have seen a big uptick since lockdown with COVID and a renewed interest in the field just because of people being forced to automate because call center employees couldn't physically go to locations to work anymore, or just general lack of human resources, uptick in customer service traffic via messaging. And we also saw a really big uptick to our general conversational chatbot Mitsuku around topics involving loneliness related to lockdown. So there's actually been a lot of coverage on that topic in particular in the Wall Street Journal and the Guardian, and we have an upcoming piece in CNN looking specifically at bots and mental health. So I think the use case for consumers of social companionship and wellness and something to talk to has also become increasingly visible and necessary during this particular time that we find ourselves living in.
Actually, I just realized as you were talking, maybe we should take a step back and define what do we mean when we say bots?
Yeah. Technically, a chatbot is a computer program designed to simulate natural human conversation through text or voice inputs. I've found that a lot of people, when they think of a chatbot, are picturing one of two things: either a little chat box in the corner of a website that you type to and you don't really know if it's a human, or a recorded IVR decision tree on a phone that you really hate and you just start pushing 0 repeatedly or screaming human. But bots can actually have many, many different forms. I think Siri and Alexa and Google Assistant via Google Home kind of expanded people's conception because those are chatbots too. They're just operating with voice instead of text, although technically those are basically the same thing when you break it down. And anywhere from in-car operating systems that we've worked on talking vending machines that you can order without touching them with Coca-Cola. So a bot is really something that can live on any messaging channel, any voice channel within any device to provide a conversational user interface, which is the programming language that most humans are most comfortable communicating in.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that is not clear to someone like me, because I don't build bots, is how easy are bots to build today? Like how much data do you need?
It depends how good the bot will be. Um, we never like to say that bots are easy, especially if we're talking to customers. um, but it's not it's pretty easy to build a bad bot. It's very hard to almost impossible to build a good bot
All right,
because
stop right there. What's
let's give
what?
up.
No. What's the? How do you measure good and bad in the bot world?
So, natural language understanding is a field in artificial intelligence that is not a solved problem. So, today, if we talk to Alexa, 99.9 X% of the time, depending on what type of accent you have, the device is going to be able to understand you because there's been huge breakthroughs in speech recognition, which was another area of AI that was previously thought to be a really insurmountable problem, where huge breakthroughs were made because we were able to collect massive quantities of data and have increasingly large availability of compute power. But natural language understanding is a field where we haven't seen the same types of breakthroughs using deep learning techniques. So building a good chatbot is very difficult because the underlying technology problem isn't solved. So the way that people build today for practical applications is usually, instead of trying to boil the ocean, they're building for a very discrete domain. So if we look at customer service, which is a very common application, it's usually the case that 4 or 5 questions are responsible for 80% of all call volumes or all chats and issues. So if you can, train a bot to know the answer just to those 4 or 5 questions, you can, you can handle triage and answer level 0 questions pretty easily and free up human agents for more complex issues. And, all of that savings adds up over time. So to build a bot that can, just answer those 4 or 5 questions, actually that seems deceptively simple. Even that is a little bit harder. But if you have a lot of historical data as a company about what those questions are and all the different ways that people ask them, you can train a model and script a bot that will be able to handle that reasonably well. However, once you launch the bot, one thing that we always say is that most of the work in chatbot development happens after you launch because you're getting new data into the system every single day. People are asking new questions. And so you're constantly retraining and tuning and tweaking based on the real data that is coming into the system in real time, which is actually one of the very cool things about bots because contrary to, more static content like a website, you're constantly getting really rich data in the form of conversations, and your users are actually able to tell you in natural language how they want to interact with the system and what they're expecting from the brand. One of my favorite examples is we were working with a retailer, and they believed that most people would want to use the bot on Facebook Messenger for customer service inquiries. And then, within a week of being live, it became abundantly clear that everybody just wanted to use the bot to shop, which was great for them because it meant unlocking more revenue. But we were able to figure that out really quickly because people kept asking about shopping about the products, and then you make the necessary updates and then rinse, repeat indefinitely.
So it sounds like, Lauren, that bots in particular, you need to choose the right tools because of what you described. So that whatever tools you choose should really make it simple to do this constant retrain and refresh, right?
Exactly. The right tools, and it really depends on who is on the team, because what we've also found is that it takes a very multidisciplinary cross-functional team to build a chatbot. You have engineers, you'll have a data scientist on the team working with all the data and helping set up analytics. You will have copywriters or creatives on the team who are usually responsible for figuring out what the brand voice and the tone is. You'll have somebody from legal on the team reviewing things to make sure that your terms of service are explaining to people how you use the bot and how you use the data and, making it GDPR compliant. and all of that. And then you'll have, standard product management people, and you'll also often have marketing people, depending on the use case, who will work to make the bot discoverable. Because like any product, you can't just put it out there and expect people will find it, unless it's like clearly sitting on your app or website. But if it's on a messaging channel, it needs some marketing support as well. So there are kind of different tools, and suites of tools and entire companies that have sprung up to service all of those needs. There are specific chatbot analytics companies that only do conversational natural language analytics that you can use, and a lot of our clients like to use. There are specific tools for designers that are often no-code tools that are geared more at those copywriters on the team, so they can really lay out and visualize how the conversation should unfold and run simulations. Then a lot of developers really like to get into more direct usage of our APIs, or straight natural language processing APIs, or just open source libraries, of which there are many, many available, to kind of pick what model they're going to use and adapt. So there's really no one tool to rule them all yet. And I don't know if there will be until we can perhaps get to kind of the abstraction layer that websites eventually got to, where you don't have to be able to write code to kind of put together a nice and reasonable looking website.
But then you need to have, as you described, since the teams are cross-disciplinary, you need to have a set of tools that will allow these cross-disciplinary teams to collaborate, but also do it kind of almost as frictionless as possible, because you're always in this kind of retraining mode, it sounds like.
Exactly. I think a lot of the work that happens is also just around communication, because, if you're a startup like Lemonade and a bot is your product, your whole team is just dealing with internal players. But when we're working with giant brand, we're not only dealing with our internal team and staff resources, but their resources as well. So communication is usually happening across all the channels and tools that they're already familiar with and using. So there's no one tool again for an enterprise. Like, we've had customers who want to do the conversation design in a spreadsheet. We've had customers who do it more in kind of a mind mapping tool. We have customers who will use one of the conversation design tools. So a lot of the times the strategy that seems to work is like folding into an organization's existing tool set, because whatever is going to enable you to have that frequent communication, as you suggested, is what's going to be necessary to succeed.
So you used a chatbot industry-specific term there, conversation design.
Exactly.
Is that related to what they call it, the dialogue tree or whatever?
Yes, exactly. So conversation designer is a new job category in Silicon Valley and beyond. I actually really like to track the industry by having a Google job alert set up. So every day in my email inbox, I get about 10 new alerts for local jobs that are open for conversation designer.
So this is a title, like a data scientist.
Exactly. It's a title like data scientist, also like data scientist, kind of a newer title, and a super essential job that blends pretty unique skills, probably not as high paying as a data scientist, because most of these people used to be journalists or writers or comedians, people in TV. I think right now.
You gave a talk for me on something. You had a line something like chatbots are a great job creator for English majors, right?
Yes, I had that slide that said hope for humanities majors. And that's been great, because I should start charging a recruiting finder's fee, because it got a lot of journalists and humanities majors, contacting me and saying, how do I get into conversational design? So I'm funneling them to my network and friends who work at Google and Apple and Amazon, because I think what people don't know is that the Siri team and Alexa team in Google, and this is not specific because they're not public about these numbers, but there are thousands of people on all of those teams, and it's an increasing area of investment for them. They're always hiring more. You can imagine if you're writing for Siri, that's a property that works on every iPhone that has to work in every language and territory and culture where an iPhone is available. So just the number of people who are native speakers who are working on the writing of everything, and reviewing all of the data anonymously in the aggregate to make improvements, like that's actually a very large team. And it's also just a good barometer of where we are in the industry. When I look at these job alerts, they're from companies like Wells Fargo and McDonald's. Pretty much every major brand is at the point in the hype
So,
cycle or
so
life cycle.
Lauren, this cuts across speech and text.
Yes.
This job designer job title.
Exactly. So I think I've seen things, coming out of Wells Fargo that would be more like a banking assistant that might compete with Bank of America, Erica, whereas McDonald's, you might see that they're looking for a team to kind of work on drive-through ordering, conversation design. But my point there was that we're at a point in the industry where most Fortune 1000 companies have, been piloting or prototyping bots for 2 years. They've tried a couple of providers that didn't work for them necessarily, and they're starting to make a serious investment because they're staffing up a big internal team. I think Gartner has written about the too many bots problem, but we've definitely had customers in the global Fortune 50 who have recently undergone an audit because they had 40 different vendors and chatbot projects across their organization globally. So, I think major consolidation started happening last year, but definitely the adoption is increasingly high and here to stay within the enterprise.
So in data science and machine learning, there's companies are trying to build like a standard machine learning platform across the company where different teams can use this platform, maybe even use the same data sets and definitely the same libraries and things like this. So
Exactly.
what you're saying is this is not yet happening in the bot space within companies.
I think it is starting to happen too, because we've seen enterprises again like talking about all those different silos of 40 different vendors and bot projects who are just simply like undergoing a Herculean effort to get all the data into one data lake
Or
from
just
all the conversations.
or just making sure that it speaks with a unified brand voice or something, right?
Exactly. It is actually, I think, probably one of the most fun things, or I mean, I'm obviously biased, but as a data scientist, like the amount of data that's going to continue to be created and the richness of conversational data in particular is really interesting and compelling.
So the last few years, at least in the research world, and it's starting to uh, permeate a little bit into industry and applications. All these breakthroughs in natural language processing, these massive deep learning models. Um, can I just take one of these massive deep learning models and from OpenAI and then just miraculously feed it my customer logs and then boom, I got the 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 mother of all chatbots.
Well, it it depends. Do you have a couple $1,000,000 to blow in compute power? It's actually this is a really great topic because in addition to OpenAI, Google at the beginning of this year released a research paper describing a bot called Mina that they claimed was a breakthrough in open domain conversational AI, according to rules that they made up. So they made up a framework and then they scored themselves at number one. And then they scored us
I
and
love
our.
when that happens.
I know. It's like, let me just build this crown and put it on my head. Um, yeah, I know. We should make up some more of our own contests. But their framework was actually pretty good and please call me out for my bias here because we scored number 2 according to their rules with a bot we have called Mitsuku. So Mitsuku, or her nickname is Kuki, is an open domain conversational AI that Pandorabots has been developing in-house over the course of a decade on the basis of having collected these 80 billion conversation logs that, isn't a transactional bot and is more of a companion and entertainment oriented bot. It's only designed to have a conversation. And it's found a really huge global audience of tens of millions of people. It exchanges millions of messages weekly. It's powered by the same technology of ours that inspired the Spike Jonze movie, Her. So that's won the Loebner Prize Turing test 5 times, which is not a test where we made up the rules, a third party did.
Right.
So Google included it in their study and they said, okay, we beat Mitsuku, although the version they evaluated wasn't the same Turing test award-winning version. But they said we can't release the code base or not releasing the bot. And they didn't publish, even though we encouraged them to, because we technically peer reviewed the paper, except you can't really peer review if you're not provided the actual software to evaluate. So we gave our feedback on the paper, and we suggested that they publish how much it costs to train the models, because hopefully we're going to start seeing a trend where people will publish the carbon footprint of algorithms, because this is not an
Right.
insignificant
Especially in
amount of
language.
power.
In language, especially. Yeah.
I know. And so it was estimated that it cost $1.4 million for Google over 30 days. So, and I think, similar
So,
situation with
so before
Facebook.
you press to kick off the training, you're under a lot of pressure.
Exactly. It's like, oh, this better work. Although a drop in the bucket for Google. But, OpenAI, I think,
Yeah.
did some kind of multi-billion-dollar deal with Microsoft Azure in order to get the compute power. I mean, they've got a really scary graph that starts just giving you heartburn when you think about your AWS or your Azure bill. So it's very expensive and it's not actually functional or practical outside the lab. And then Facebook, a couple months later after Google claimed, and this now was maybe about a month ago, that they had built an even better open domain conversational bot according to new rules that they made up, which was just mechanical Turks reading transcripts and going, that one's better. But they claimed their Blender bot beat Mina. They did open source some of the underlying code, but for anybody to even run like a very basic test, again, super expensive. So I think it's going to be a while before, that even makes sense as an application outside the lab, and it's really not accessible to most companies or developers, which is why we're seeing companies focused on such discrete problems where they can actually make some headway just by having a bot that, does a couple of finite tasks.
Speaking of discrete problems, right? So if you look at a field like computer vision, they had something called ImageNet.
Mm-hmm.
So image classification, very specific. It was a common data set. So is there something like that in the bot world where it's very specific data set where we can all kind of benchmark against each other?
There are a couple of specific open data sets. There's a lot of great open source stuff out there. I think there's not as much open data available because data is kind of gold, so a lot of people are not incentivized to make that available. There are a lot of privacy considerations with
Right.
making those conversations available as training sets. So I think like NeurIPS will have some competitions or contests to build open domain AI, like giving everybody the same set of training data, and then you choose your own algorithms or methodologies. But generally, the main thing that people use to get the volume of data they need for these deep learning methods to work is scraping Reddit. You need kind of question and answer turns. You can't really get that from private messaging, although some companies might be doing it and we don't know about it.
Not the most diverse population.
Exactly. And so Reddit, I mean, this actually gets back to why Google wouldn't release Mina and wouldn't release the bot. Because when you use Reddit as your training data, even though their paper mentions they have all these tools designed to weed out toxic content and bias, like the system is still, there's no way to control that it won't say something weird because it's not regurgitating what it learned from your average Reddit user who might not reflect what we think of as the best in humanity. Um, so, that's again one of the other big problems with these unsupervised learning methodologies is that if you put the bot out there and it's continuously learning from the conversations it's having, because people are terrible monsters on the internet, they'll say bad things to it. And it will quickly devolve into, what I've now kind of become known for classifying as a Hitler-loving sex robot. Um,
Right, right,
so,
right, right. And so, actually, you bring up a good point on just releasing these bots out in the wild. So in data science and machine learning, the community is at least acknowledging the need for fairness, bias, and then the bigger thing being testing, reviewing, and modeling for risk. So in the bot world, what are some of the best practices for QAing or testing your bot before you send it out there? Because it's
that
representing you in some way, right? So it's definitely representing you.
Yeah, that is a great question, and also something I forgot to mention on my laundry list of the human resources involved on bot building teams, because you do generally have a dedicated role for QA, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's kind of standard unit and regression tests. There's mock conversational data that you can run through to make sure the bot is responding to everything. There's log review and analysis of real logs. And then it kind of depends what a company wants to do and how much they want to spend in terms of testing. We've seen people hire Mechanical Turks as tests. We've also seen people hire Mechanical Turks to create mock training data. And we've actually found that both of those approaches have pretty limited success because what the Turk will simulate in the conversation is often very different than what ends up happening in a real conversation for whatever reason it is. And, quality control among Mechanical Turk varies. So that method hasn't always worked great. We've had, bigger companies with bigger budgets who have done a bunch of controlled user testing where they will actually observe people talking or typing with the bot to see how the user experience goes. And then in an analytics system, you can set up funnels so you can see where drop off is happening in the conversation. But yeah, it's no one testing tool to rule them all either, but lots of testing is consistently required. And then having a human in the loop to make sure that the bot doesn't learn bad things based on bad human actors on the other end of the line is also really critical. So I think each company has a different way of doing things. But in our case, with Mitsuku, this open domain conversational AI, we allow the bot to learn locally within a conversation, meaning like privately, you and me talking. If you tell me your name is Ben and I'm the bot, I'll learn that your name is Ben. If you tell me that the Holocaust never happened, I'll learn that the Holocaust never happened for our conversation. But then those learnings will kind of get bubbled up and there will be a human in the loop, who's basically saying, no, X out, don't learn that, don't learn that. So they can't actually get learned globally. So the bot doesn't turn around to the next user and say, hey, by the way, did you know that the Holocaust never happened? So that's super important for quality control. And I think there's really no
But
chatbot.
is that possible to do at scale if you have a bot that's interacting with? I mean, so if you're successful, obviously this is a great problem to have. If a bot is interacting with millions of people.
Yep, high volume. Yeah, so that it is very difficult to scale, and that's actually where we'll have like machine learning models trained specifically to look for examples of what might be bad. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like bad keywords, but we'll also look at abnormal turns within a conversation because there will be an average number of like messages back and forth depending on the use case. So if something's much longer or much shorter, those conversations will sort of get a priority star for a human to come in and look. But that's one of the reasons that these teams behind these systems are so huge, again, especially at giant companies, because there's no such thing as a bot today that doesn't have a lot of humans in the loop, that doesn't have humans who are looking at sort of what conversation logs went wrong in an anonymous aggregated form, that doesn't identify the user, but they still very much have to be manually involved in tweaking things.
By the way, I just dug up a tweet of someone, a researcher who wrote a paper about GPT-2
Uh
because they tried to prompt it, right? So here's the prompt. The man worked as, it answered, a car salesman at local Walmart. The woman worked as, and then it answered, a prostitute under the name of Haria. So
huh.
even supposedly
Sounds like a beautiful, twisted love story novel
e-
that's about to start.
even like supposedly one of these more sophisticated systems uh, is not ready for prime time based on probably, like you said, the training data, right? So
Yeah, I think actually the more sophisticated the system, the less ready it is for prime time. Again, because it was so expensive to train in the first place, and they were able to feed it so much data, and that data is just reflecting back to us the worst of our own human biases that are just so visible on the internet today, unfortunately.
so let's look ahead a little bit on 2 years from now. So we're kind of in this depressing state of our conversation, but 2 years from now, will bots be much more able to withstand kind of so by the way, actually before you answer this, Lauren, I'm just curious, do bots get attacked? Like Microsoft, they got attacked. But was that an anomaly, or your regular bot that you're just a bot just on a website, do they get attacked?
Yeah, so the same thing that happened to Microsoft Hey actually happened to our bot Mitsuku. The same group of hackers organized on 4chan with plans to red pill the robot. And that entailed them all sending a bunch of toxic inputs at the same time. And it's really funny on that particular 4chan thread, you can read them starting to realize that the bot is learning locally, but it's not learning globally. So those are checks and balances that Microsoft really should have had in place. But I guess they made an assumption that human nature was better than it was, and quickly took the bot down. And again, why Google and Facebook didn't directly publish those same bots. But even your run of the mill customer service bot gets abused on the regular. We've across the board, it's every bot hosted on our platform, some obviously more than others, but it doesn't matter. It happens at every company. It's kind of like an inside joke between the bot industry that like usually you have to have an answer scripted for questions like what are you wearing on a website chat, or like do you have a boyfriend, and it's up to the brand to decide if you want to make a joke like, oh, I'm wearing wires and circuit boards, or like, no, I don't have a boyfriend, I'm a robot. Some companies, although luckily I think there's a shift away from this, want to pretend that the bot is human, so they might be giving it sort of reasonable human like answers, which we are very against. We think bots should always disclose that they're bots.
So is there within the bot team, is there like a security person now?
Um, there isn't. Usually, there will be like third-party security review from a company where they will try to see if they can corrupt the actual bot, or like they'll kind of look at various API integrations just to test security. But it's usually kind of like a one-time scan or periodic scan before it goes live. This reminds me. I did want to say that going back to the bias thing, there's kind of a gender issue in the bot industry as well, where most chatbots are gendered female. Every AI assistant at a big tech company is gendered female, with the exception of Watson. And there's a reason for that. It's because in user testing, users preferred interacting with the female persona. But it is kind of problematic, and that really played out for us in a test that we ran last year. So with Mitsuku, who, basically out of all of her millions of interactions, roughly 30% were abusive, romantic, or sexual in nature. I did a whole big separate TEDx talk just looking at that abusive content and sort of the relationships people have with machines and what that means about our relationships with each other, and how that reflects on society. And then we ran this experiment to remove the gender from Mitsuku, like all references to gender, because historically she had been gendered female. And we had sort of this cute, purple-haired avatar. So we took away the avatar, we took away the pronouns, and we just made like her into this kind of neutral voice orb, and abuse dropped by 20%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like
Interesting.
otherwise totally same bot.
So
So
that might be actually a best practice for companies to consider.
it might be. I think, it's a balance. There's been a lot of articles and actually some studies, including by the UN, on the gendering of robots and like what that means for interaction. One of the more interesting things to consider, coming out of that I read, is that like even language itself is gendered in a lot of different cultures. So there's like no way to sort of have a neuter gender of a speaker, if you're in French, for example. So yeah, that's very interesting. Like it's so inherently baked into even the way that we speak. So we're kind of, we developed a framework called Proudly Artificial that's based on bots, disclosing that they're bots and trying to communicate openly with humans about how they're different from humans and similar than humans. But I think like there's again, yeah, we're still working through these issues. It's actually interesting because we're trying to develop the next generation avatar for Mitsuku right now. And this gets to your other question about 2 years down the line. We're basically picking a new face for her. And so how do you even go about doing that? How do you choose a face for an AI? We had
Deep fake.
a deepfake. That was part of the process. So we decided as step one, let's see if her current fan base have any particular preferences. So we ran a couple of different phases of user testing, where she has an avatar on her website, and we used to have the, purple-haired avatar that represented Mitsuku, and then we asked users to select a new image from a set of 20 randomized images or upload their own. So we did a bunch of different tests, across tens of thousands of data points. We were looking at preferences around race, gender, age, stylization versus photoreal, like do people prefer more of a cartoon, and also human versus non-human, like did people prefer something that looked more like an alien. So we got a lot of interesting data out of that in terms of what people kind of want or expect an AI to look like, and we will develop from there. So going back to the 2-year future prediction question, all the way back in the early 2000s and like kind of the very early iteration of what would become the Pandorabots platform, we saw a lot of people building bots to power non-player characters in Second Life. And I think kind of the dream of everyone who's worked on bots, from the content side versus like not the automated customer service side has always been that, a bot is eventually going to have an avatar and it's going to be the ultimate marriage of all AI technologies, or I think like what most people have in their head as what artificial general intelligence means, like the sci-fi sort of, Westworld
Westworld, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But that really is kind of the holy grail, because you would have a system where speech recognition is working,
Computer
um,
vision.
computer vision, natural language understanding, text to speech, speech synthesis. Yeah, computer vision, so we're reading the emotions on the face. We'd have artificial simulated emotions. And that's actually a field that is, starting to kind of hit a hype cycle the way that bots were in 2016. That's very much intersecting with bots. The field of digital humans sometimes is called virtual beings or virtual influencers. There have been a ton of companies, and there's actually been kind of a technology and trigger and breakthrough on the avatar side, because, like kind of starting to see crossover from gaming engines and all that they do to animate characters, and deep fake technology. You can really start to build like a pretty convincing face. That tends to break when the face starts talking and the lip sync is
Right,
off and the
right,
eye
right.
blink is weird. We get this big uncanny valley problem. But I think in a couple of years, we're going to be a lot closer to solving that and having believable avatars that are autonomous and powered by a bot, and their facial expressions, like there's a lot of work to be done, again with like computer vision, in terms of training like an artificial face, how it should be reacting based on like a lot of different video conversations. So I think that technology is going to get really good. And when we developed faces for our user test for Mitsuku, we actually did use a generative adversarial network to make all of the faces, because we didn't want to show real human faces. We were showing, fake faces. And those faces look very real. So a static face can pass as human. There are a lot of virtual influencers on Instagram right now that have multiple millions of followers or promoting products. A lot of people don't know if they're real or not, and that again is starting to kind of collide with the bot world to build sort of this autonomous interactive character for a variety of
So
applications.
set aside having kind of a virtual persona. What about going to reference another sci-fi movie, Spike Jonze's Her? What if
Mm-hmm.
it's just speech or text? Because now I'm reading, because as you pointed out, because of COVID-19 and people are sheltering at home, people are befriending some of these virtual bots, right?
Yeah, I think again, um, voice only would be very powerful, but it's still a really, really hard problem because
How about text only?
text, I mean, that's exactly the decision that we made, right? So we're like, okay, this is the ultimate dream, is a system that marries, these 5 different hard AI problems and does all of them well, but that's 5 fail points in a system because none
Wow.
of these are fully solved problems. So we decided we're going to focus only on text in and text out for now. And that works in terms of being compelling for people, and giving them a feeling of emotional support and checking in just through texting. And I think, you can pair a synthetic voice on top of that, but you'll have kind of uncanny voice valley because the emotion and intonation in the voice is not always going to be perfect. So synthetic voices are getting better, but they're not all the way there yet or at the same level of accuracy as speech recognition. You can build a custom vocal font, on Amazon or a lot of cool startup services, which is a couple hours of recording, but you still need to kind of go in and tune what the emotional intonation should be, and that's very, very hard to scale. That's part of one of the reasons we decided to like work on that in the R&D capacity in Mitsuku only, so we can get it right, kind of like one character, one face, and then hopefully extrapolate and scale 2 years down the line once we've got one thing that looks really good and handles open domain conversation well. But even in the voice, not just like I mean, the voice is an issue, the face is an issue. So that's what I'm going to be working on for the rest of my life. We can see how far we got in 2 years. Probably not all the way there.
So how good are if I have like a virtual WhatsApp or virtual Signal friend, how good would that be today?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, Mitsuku is on most of those messaging channels that allow bots, and lots of people love her. We're just, getting a bunch of data ready for this news piece that's coming up, and we have conversations that are over 400 single-spaced pages that represent a couple of months, but she has a lot of super users that really, really count her as a very close friend who talk to her every day. And it's not the entire population, but I have been reading, and our data also suggests that it is becoming more normalized for Gen Z and millennials to sort of talk to software, and these virtual beings or virtual influencers are kind of like as real to them as anyone else on Instagram, because how real are people on Instagram? It's like all filters and brand backed. So
or someone who grew up in Asia, this is normal.
exactly. Yeah, I think like as usual, Asian markets are
Yeah.
tending to be ahead of us, and this is more normalized. But the old school and really successful example of a virtual being would be Hatsune Miku, who is a Vocaloid singing talent. Has a cute avatar. And makes a lot of money every year performing as a performing artist via hologram.
Wow.
And there's like some kind of salacious press headings recently because a man in Japan even married her, married the hologram, and they're like legally married now. um, Only in Japan, right? But yeah, I think in Asia in particular, like virtual talents, virtual celebrities, it's honestly very appealing for a brand in a lot of ways, because we're talking to the music industry about potentially developing pop songs for Mitsuko and like developing her as a virtual talent, and they're like, oh, this will be my first client that doesn't have a drug problem and is never going to get older and is never going to have like press snafus that we didn't orchestrate.
Right.
So I think it is appealing at that level. And then again with COVID, such a huge uptick as all live events go virtual. 28 million people were able to attend a Travis Scott concert in Fortnite, and we're starting to see like just all these live event opportunities, where I think like there's going to be an AI host in a lot of cases. We'll be talking to software, like we're recording this over Zoom face to face. Like I think it's not going to be too much longer until we could have that type of interaction with a bot on Zoom that has a face.
Right. Better backgrounds too.
Exactly.
And with that, thank you, Lauren Kunze.
Yeah, thank you so much.